circling back to your career, in our last interview, you had mentioned you had a bad experience with Howard Cosell at a halftime show or something like that.
Well, I was the inheritor to the halftime highlight stick that Howard did on Monday Night Football.
Okay.
And the halftime highlight stick was literally a stick. It was almost a comic book performance that he put together every Monday night to deliver the highlights from the preceding week. So eventually the network decides that Howard has aged out of that, or he decides that he's aged out of that, and they're choosing who's the next person to do the halftime highlights. And I was the next person to do the halftime highlights. And I was still very young. I was in my early 30s. I wasn't exactly a personality match with Frank Gifford and Don Meredith, and it just was. It was a little off kilter, and viewers hated me. Literally hated me because I was not Howard Cosell doing what they had come to want and expect as the halftime highlights. In fact, it was my experience doing the halftime highlights, and eventually they switched to having Gifford do it. It was that experience that prompted Dennis Swanson, the executive who later wanted to get rid of me at ABC Sports, to believe that boxing was the way to do that, because he thought, okay, I'll assign him to boxing. The audience will see him as the successor to Cossell, and the same thing will happen. They'll blackball him because he's not Cossell. That was his method and his formula in that regard.
So you never had a problem directly with Cossell?
Well, I actually worked with him. And
what was that experience like?
Well, it was unusual. But if you knew Howard, and I'm sure you didn't, if you had known Howard, you might have not have been surprised by this. Howard eventually prevailed upon the network to give him a magazine-style show, a weekend, sort of a sports version of 60 Minutes or something of that nature, as his showcase for his unique reporting skills. Tell it like it is. And the show was called Sports Beat. And the basic nature of Sports Beat at that point was that Howard was going to sit in the studio every weekend and interview Sonny Werblin, Al Davis, a couple of others. There were four, Bowie Kuhn. There were four of them who were buddies of his, drinking buddies of his at 21 up on 52nd Street. And he would do a studio interview with one of those four guys every weekend, and then somebody had to go out and travel and do a feature report. So I was the guinea pig who had to go travel for Howard and do a feature report. And I wound up having an office right down the hall from his on the 12th floor at ABC. And that was a schizophrenic type experience because I was 3 doors away from him. And Howard was always theatrical and bombastic. And every time I went in and sat in my office there on the 12th floor and tried to do work, do whatever I was doing, to get ready for one of the trips I was doing for him, to go interview somebody and develop a story that he could play off of on the air, he would pop out of his office where the 3 secretaries were located, and he would either say, the kid down the hall there is the only other on-air person here who can actually complete a complex sentence. He's way more intelligent than all those other morons who are on the air doing Wide World of Sports or any of the other programs that we're putting on the air. So the truth is, he's the best person to be doing what he's doing for us. That was one iteration. The other version was, the kid is a moron, hired, promoted, an imbecile who is pretending on the air that he can be a network sportscaster. It's embarrassing to us, and it's embarrassing to the entire network. It just depended which mood he was in on any given day, which of those things I was going to hear. And eventually he began writing his books. The first one was called Cossell. Then there was one called Like It Is. There were 3 or 4 of those books. So once he's writing the books, then he is in his office and he keeps writing, and he has the galleys in his desk. And if I was there, eventually he would send one of the secretaries down the hall. Howard needs to see you in his office right now. And I would go to the office. Jimmy, I'm going to read you something which is very important for you to know, because if you want to continue here and succeed in this career, you have to know the things that only I can teach you. And he would pull out the galleys and read to me from whatever was going to be the next book. And my job, of course, was to say, oh, Howard, that's amazing. That's unique. You're the only person in sports who can deliver that kind of perspective.
So he was a very arrogant person, you would say? Or?
Oh my gosh. I mean, arrogant doesn't get to 1/3 of it. You know, he was extremely arrogant, beyond arrogant. He was hyperbolically egotistical. He was incredibly insecure. He needed attention the way a theatrical 5-year-old needs attention. But it was all part of who he is. A lot of people thought it was an act. It wasn't an act. And he was catered to and massaged by a lot of different people, including Leonard Goldenson, who was the individual owner of ABC, including Roone Arledge, the chief executive of the sports division, who had discovered Howard when he was head of children's programming at NBC and had taken a limousine in to the city every Saturday morning from Scarsdale to do the oversight of the children's programming on NBC, and began listening to a Little League baseball radio show that Howard was doing in Scarsdale. That's where Arledge first heard the voice. Little Stevie Scheffler playing center field for Ben Brunei Syracuse, and whatever. And he heard that voice, and Arledge thought to himself, I could do something with that. And Howard got a gig at ABC Radio doing sports reporting, and eventually Arledge put him on the air at ABC Sports and created the role for him on Monday Night Football that made him larger than life. So Arledge was the puppeteer, and Cossell was the puppet. And that's how he developed his unique and outsized career at ABC Sports. And eventually I worked for him. I worked with him. It was torturous. It was humiliating. It was funny. It was unique.
Man, that's so interesting that he got a job off of a Little League
baseball radio show.
That's I feel like that's a story. Have you ever told that story? That's amazing to hear.
I would love to tell you, Joel, that you are the first person to whom I have ever told the Little League baseball story, but that would be fibbing.
Okay. All right.
I have let it out before.
Okay.